Good morning, my name's Bernice and I'm going to be speaking to you about one of the new grade 10 NSC texts, The Mark by Edyth Bulbring, and I have found two covers of the books, and the second cover, as you can see, has a picture of our main character Edyth with the numbers stamped across her back which control movement and dehumanize the inhabitants of Slum City, making them feel much like prisoners would feel, that they're really just a number. So quite useful for prediction exercises. The genre is dystopian young adult science fiction, and dystopian fiction is defined as a fiction set in an imagined place or state in which everything is unpleasant or bad, typically a totalitarian or environmentally degraded one, and this novel is set in a totalitarian, environmentally degraded setting, 250 years in the future. I found quite a useful little video clip which will explain dystopian fiction to your students, although they probably have some idea because most youngsters today have probably watched Divergent and The Hunger Games, but this is quite useful. It's only a minute long. And this is the discussion that the book invites us to have. I'm just going to go through the main characters briefly, although I'm sure that you probably know them. Juliet is our main protagonist and first-person narrator. This makes her unreliable because we're in her head, and so we can't be sure if everything she says is true, and we can't even be sure if what she tells us she feels is in fact how she feels. So she appears selfish, duplicitous, and a bit of a cheat and a liar, and a thief, but deep down we learn that she's actually fiercely loyal. She has unruly hair and freckles and big eyes and what she describes as pus-coloured posh skin, which is probably not as awful as she's describing it. Kitty is the only person besides Nicholas that she cares about. Kitty is described as greedy and vain on the surface, but we found out later she's actually a very brave and noble martyr. And then there's Nicholas, who is destined to become a locust and follow in his father's footsteps. He's a Mangerian and part of the elite, but he's drawn to Edyth because he recognizes his own longing for freedom in her, and because he's attracted to her. So there is this forbidden love story that weaves through the story. Mistress, Master, and Little Miss. Mistress is her mother, and although she seems kind and beautiful, this is a facade. Master is her husband Hilton, and he is an elitist, a classist. He has no redeeming qualities. He's really a dreadful man. And then Little Miss is Larissa, her sickly, spoilt half-sister, and they form a bond before Edyth realizes that they are sisters. And then Handler Xavier and the orphan warden are also family members, although she again isn't aware of it. Handler Xavier is actually her father, although he doesn't know this. And the orphan widow knows who Etty is and seems fond of her, but doesn't treat her very well. And the text suggests that perhaps she is an alcoholic. She drinks a lot of what is called bug juice made out of dead flies. It sounds dreadful. And perhaps, perhaps this is why she doesn't treat Etty or any of the orphans very well at all. And then a few of the other characters, not all of them. We note that civil servants are often named after insects. The cockroach is repellent, much like a cockroach is. If you're like me, I can't bear them. He is the director of Justice and Peace, which is ironic, reminiscent of the double speak of 1984, Orwell's novel. And he is the holder of the keys to Savage City. And then the locusts are the corrupt police. They're a plague on the inhabitants of Slum City. They treat them poorly. They often steal the little that they earn. And then finally, the only other character I'm going to look at now is Reader, who is a blind man who taught Etty to read. There is an understanding between them. Etty brings him books and reads for him, and in exchange she can access his library. But because Etty is the narrator and we're limited to her perspective, and she believes that she is able to hoodwink Reader by helping herself to his books, there are hints in the text that indicate he knows what she is doing, which she's probably oblivious of, and we're pretty amused as readers when we realize that he knows. He says things like, "Make sure you hang onto your bag as you walk the streets, Juliet. There are tricksters out there," and he's obviously talking about her. Some of the themes, these are some of the themes that I've put together. I'm sure that you might have some other ideas, and I'd love to discuss them at the end if we have time. Fate and control, which is linked to all Big Brother societies. This idea of the birth lottery, restriction of movement, and in this novel, the machine's numbers deliberately dehumanizing people, much like prison numbers do. Escape and freedom. Everyone is trying to escape with very little altruism. Everybody is out to look after themselves, except Kitty, who ought to really probably be the real heroine of the story. She seems to be prepared to sacrifice herself for the movement, for freedom for everyone, whereas Etty is the protagonist, but we assume that her lack of altruistic sentiment is deliberate, so that it'll allow for some growth in the sequels. And then love and hate. Nothing is as it seems. Her mother hates her, her father hates her, she hates everyone, or seems to, and this obviously ties into appearance versus reality, which I've put a bit later. Oppression. Class divisions are reminiscent of racial segregation in South Africa, and segregation in other ways, the various ways that people are oppressed in the world today and throughout history. And so this is a common theme in contemporary dystopian fiction, like The Hunger Games and Divergent, and less recent ones like 1984. Prophecy and destiny. The all-seeing birds are blinded, but can see, like the masses who are figuratively blind to the injustice they suffer. Although they suffer vividly under the yoke of this oppression, the birds suggest the future is better, and like many other dystopian novels, there's a hero destined to save everyone, or in our case, an anti-hero, because Etty is so difficult to like. Appearance versus reality. She appears to be selfish. She appears to be a lying cheat. Handler Xavier appears to be just a con artist, when in fact he's actually instrumental in the rebellion. Kitty's not just a selfish pleasure worker. She's a brave martyr. Mistress is not the loving mother we think she is. Nicholas is not the elite posh boy happy to enlist as a locust. Nothing is really as it seems. Alright, some ideas for teaching strategies. One of the things that I find quite useful is looking up reviews and going through those with students. And I found a few which I think are quite useful. The Mark is a fast-paced, gritty and uncomfortable read. It will fascinate teen readers. It's the South African fiction we've all been waiting for. It's a dystopian, futuristic, mystical, dark novel. It would make a great set work for teenage pupils, which has become quite prophetic actually. And more, another person here says she's South Africa's premier storyteller for young adults. And then this review in more detail claims that instead it's grittier, it has a more scratchy behind the eyes feel, the kind of feel that you might expect from George Orwell's 1984. So it's not the same as The Hunger Games and Divergent and the other dystopian novels that you may have already read. So pick it up if you're looking for something slightly different, it claims at the bottom. I also find it quite useful to find out who the author is. This is Edyth Bulbring. She is a former political correspondent and news editor for the Sunday Times. So, some of the things that she delves into look into political issues of today. And you can read more about who she is at jonathanbell.coza. And then I find the quotes from an interview with her quite useful too. It's a completely new genre for me. She claims she hadn't read any of the novels that we know, the popular dystopian novels that we know of today. She says that it reflects her belief that all systems of government are pretty much the same. They're underpinned by ugly, greedy, rich men. Despite the change that good people like Mandela bring about, in the end, the ugly, greedy, rich men with big guns come back and nothing ever changes. And so, we see this in Edyth, who's quite cynical. She thinks one system is as bad as the next, and that's why she doesn't want to be the new poster girl for other people's agendas. She's not the special girl with special powers. She's not even very nice. And so, she's quite difficult to like, and yet we do like her because, because she loves, and she loves hard and true, Bulbring says. The second is that she's very loyal and seems to be discerning. And then about setting, she realized that it wouldn't work in South Africa or even abroad, so she decided to create a fictitious place, and this is why it falls into the sci-fi genre. And she talks about how she feels about big corporations and their control over the environment, and I'm going to look at that because the novel looks at how they make food, how they make meat, franken meat if you like, and how they control the masses that way by poisoning the meat. It's set 250 years after a time when the world blew up and cut off half of the moon. And she talks about, what survived, fleas, rats and cockroaches, and hardy-dars, and why she loves hardy-dars, how they appear ungainly and ugly, but are actually graceful and beautiful, and how, the mooty nags take the eyes out, so that they have second sight, and she's chosen them to be the blind tellers of prophecy, and they have an important role to play. They move the plot along in various different ways, which we'll look at just now. Alright, here are my spark notes on the novel, and I'm probably not going to be able to get through all of them, so I'll just whiz past dystopia. I'm happy to make this available to anyone who might find these useful. So she is an orphan and a trained street trickster. The novel is set in a dystopian future, split along rigid class divisions and overseen by locusts. And Edyth is born into the poor of Slum City. She's an orphan, and she recognizes that she's dehumanized, and she's quite rebellious in the face of it. But I've never spoken to one in the way you would speak to a real person, she says about locusts, because I've noticed that when they speak to me, they treat me as though I was a different species. Like, if I were to cut off my finger, I would not feel pain. If I felt sad, I could not feel as sad as one of them. I know they think this about me, because when I look at them, I think the same. So she's quite strong and rebellious right from the get-go. Everyone is assigned a number by a machine at birth, and this decides who you're going to be, what's your job, your future career, your class, and who you're going to marry. Your number will match up with somebody else, and that'll be your fate mate. And as a drudge, she'll probably be linked to married to a drainer. Her fate mate will be a drainer or somebody of lowly, equally lowly status. And it also helps the locusts to track them. They can be found, the locusts are able to track them no matter where they are, as long as they have the numbers on their backs. Class divisions. Through the first person narration of Edyth, we learn about the three broad classes: the Mangerians, the posh group who run the city, the drudges, pleasure workers, and market nags and other lower classes, And I think this broadly includes the rejects who live on the roofs and are rejected by society because they're no longer of any use. And then the savages of Savage City, this is where you're sent if you're too savage to follow the party line and to fall into line and behave yourself. And the Mangerians are the post-conflagration families who banded together and got things running again after the world blew up and fell apart. The book refers to this conflagration but never really elaborates properly. It just suggests that a massive fire destroyed society, and what emerged from the ashes was this dystopian reality where the rich live lavish lives and the poor barely have enough to eat. The loot is stored in Mangerian warehouses where it's sorted and sold to the posh, and only enough people with enough credits to buy relics from the time before the seas rose up and swallowed the world. I'm going to move ahead to Etty's only vice, which is books. They're hard to come by, and this just shows the subversion of this dystopian reality, because books ought not to be contraband. And we discover that handler Xavier is quite cruel to Kitty. To Etty, Kitty claims he treats her like a daughter, but he's very hard on the bigger orphans. The beginning of each month, the orphan warden gives us our allowance. When it runs out, we play a game with handler Xavier so we can eat. And those who aren't chosen to play this game have to scavenge for food in garbage bins. So he's quite a difficult character to pin down. The experiment. Nowadays, the only way to get food is to slice and dice and multiply it in the laboratory. Food is produced in labs, and the most alarming thought for me is that this Frankenmeat's already being made. And I'll call up an article by The Guardian if we have time afterwards, which shows that they are in fact making fish already, and people have tasted this fish, and apparently it's not that bad, but it's quite scary because they can put anything they like into it, and this is what they do. They poison the food, make the masses uncontrollable so that they'll have a reason to inoculate them, to remove their savage gene and make them more pliable. And another disturbing element about the scarcity of food is that any food is no matter how spoilt or rotten it is eaten. Nothing is wasted. The rejects wade into the water, fighting with the cockroaches over the flesh. Meat is meat. Alright, they're all-seeing birds. The birds are a recurring motif in the novel. A bird in flight. My notes on this, I'll read my notes on this. A bird in flight is free, but the birds in this book are often blind or blinded, and yet can prophesy. The suggestion is that the ostensible freedom of the low classes is a fallacy, because they could not escape with the numbers on their backs tracking them, just like the birds are bound into servitude by the imposed blindness. The fact that they can see what others cannot suggests that the inhabitants are also aware of their true situation and acknowledge that there's no escape. They are metaphorically blinded or grounded because they cannot leave, as they cannot see a solution. Good evening, Mistress Hardydar. I hope the day has treated you well. No, I don't. I hope the flies have eaten chunks from the back of your neck where you can't get at them. This is very typical of Etty's narration. What she says to people and what she tells us in her head often are in stark contrast. And the witch is playing a game with Nelson called Extinct Species, and we learn that the animals that did survive were kept in the zoo and were eventually eaten because food was so scarce. And Nelson notices that she can read and how unusual this is, but the witch says that she can't be the one. She just doesn't have a savage gene left in her body, and she just isn't. She can't be the one that they're looking for. Talking about the rebellion. Later on, she helps hide her charge's little bird, Princess Fanny, which helps the two characters bond. The bird becomes a messenger at the end of the book and an important plot device to explain how her mother finds her. So that again shows how important birds are, and how Edyth Bulbring uses birds in the novel to move the plot along, and their function as a messenger throughout in various different ways. The orphans, Etty is an orphan. She pretends she doesn't care for them, but but we learn that she really does. In fact, she spends most of the book trying to convince us, or herself, that she doesn't care about anyone but herself, and her relationship with Kitty and Nicholas. But the way she speaks about Mistress and her sister all betray her. Her only wish is to be rid of the numbers on her back, and she goes to great lengths. She tries to use a cream, an acid cream, that eventually will hit bone, because the numbers force her into the destiny chosen for her, her trade, and who she will marry. It's all decided by the numbers on her back. Fate mates decide who they marry, or who they'll be matched up with, rather. And this matchmaking is ostensibly an improvement on our contemporary pairings, and demonstrates a disturbing regression in our rights and autonomy. It's reminiscent of Orwell's 1984 again, where official approval is required before marriage. In this novel, the selection is mostly random within each class, again highlighting class divisions based on the numbers on your back. So it is left to fate, fate mates, hence the word fate mates. And she speaks about it, and how people are kind of herded like cattle by the locusts, and how some seem happy. It's like they've accepted their lot, they've internalized their oppression, but some cry, some are upset about it. And we learn quite a lot about Edyth from the way she describes things. She talks about how they've fallen down the rabbit hole with Alice and wonder if they're living a dream. If they breathe hard enough, will the locust fold like a pack of cards? And others have been swept in a tornado with Dorothy and Toto, just showing how intelligent she is. She's learnt a lot from the book she's read, and how imaginative she is too. Another difference is that the Mangerians can choose for themselves, so they can barter to match their offspring with other Mangerians, depending on what they want to, where they want their power to lie, and it's got nothing to do with love. A couple of years back, a boy jumped off the stage and tried to run away from his fate mate, a fierce goblin of a girl. He spent several weeks in quarantine, fed on a liquid diet of love potion. They drilled lessons of intimacy into him, and now he's docile. He never forgets to carry out the night soil, which I assume is their toilet bucket. And she says, without my own mark, I would not be a drudge. I would have no fate mate. There would be no control. It would be chaos like the olden days, savage. My lips like the feel of the word, so I whisper it again. Freedom. And then weaving its way throughout the whole story is this love story between Edyth and Nicholas. Nicholas is a posh and a future locust, and he is drawn to her. He recognizes something in her straight away, something that longs for freedom just like he does. But he's also attracted to her. He thinks she's pretty, and this just shows how unreliable she is as a narrator. She thinks she has pus-colored skin, but he thinks she's pretty, and their love is forbidden. He says, oops, there's another freckle, let's get out of the sun. His smile says he likes my freckles, and Edyth seems to be the more pragmatic of the two. Despite the way he makes her feel, she can shrug it off. She appears to have some difficulty forming connections. This is understandable because she is an orphan and can look forward to a life of drudgery and dissatisfaction. You've been tracking me. Why? I sound like a dead brain, but I can't help myself. Because you're just like me. Yes, you are. I know you've tried everything, Juliet, because I have too. Edyth cannot understand his interest in her because she's been concerned with survival and freedom until then, and has never been treated as worthy of love. The closest she has ever come to genuine affection is her loyalty to Kitty. I keel over into those glass green pools that say he likes my big mouth and my skinny legs, and he does not think I am ugly. He's talking to me like I'm a real person and not a troll from Slum City. And the attraction appears to be mutual, and I think this element of the story will really appeal to teenagers. This idea of young love and finding each other despite circumstance. Their attraction is complicated by the class division. But you are a posh. Your father's a guardian. You've got everything. I'm a drudge. I don't have anything. He sighs. Because I'm not a locust, and I can never be a locust. I'm not sure who I am yet. but I don't want to be what the machine tells me I am. So he's exactly like her. The situation is further complicated when we learn that he's actually been promised to Ety's half-sister Larissa, and because she is the firstborn, and ironically, Ety's older than her, so perhaps she ought to really be considered mistress's firstborn, perhaps not master's though, obviously, because he's not her father. Despite their complicated situation, he seems willing to do anything for her. There's something I need to do first, Ety says to him, and he says, what do you want me to do, Juliet? I'll do anything. And then the novel starts to talk a bit about her life as a drudge, and we get more fascinating insights into what she thinks and how she feels and how intelligent she is, and more references to the books that she's read. She says, I leave them both and fly off to school. I take the second start to the right, straight on till morning. I'm on my way to Neverland with Wendy and Michael and John. And she also speaks about the magic faraway tree where Dame Washalot hangs out her huge panties before tossing the dirty water, dodging those arrows. And then she's rudely brought back to reality when a pullock shouts at her and she steps off the road into a gutter full of muck. Her dry, sarcastic humour is evident throughout. She often makes comments like this. The other girls stop jumping and crowd around me chanting. Their pinchers tell me how much they like me. When she's assigned to her family, it's coincidentally her own mother's household. And also her great aunt is the respected, beloved servant there. But Mary doesn't realise that she is her great aunt. And in fact only cares about mistress. Ety refers to her as an orc, which tells us that she's obviously read J.R.R. Tolkien. This is our first description of Mary, and she also uses nursery rhymes in the novels she's read to escape. I stare down at my booties and sing a song of sixpence in my head. They function to remind the reader that she's been exposed to books, and I think that grade 10 learners will enjoy this. They'll remember the ditties and references from their own reading and childhood. The children of the posh play in the entertainment zones. Their drudge carers push them on swings, and then the game changes to reject, and they tell mother that the carers are useless and should go to the dumps. So the situation could change at any time for these drudges. They need to make sure that even the children, they're really good to the children. They're treated horribly, because if they don't, they could land up in the dumps with nothing. Ety manages the pressure with her usual facetiousness. Adorable, she says of the children. I could just squeeze the breath out of them, Dora says. I tell her I've had the same thoughts on occasion. Mangerians are cruel and classist, especially Master, who says, how do you kill 20 flies in one go at a dinner party? You hit a reject in the face with a frying pan. And everyone laughs, and then he tries another one. What does a locust call a pullock after chopping both legs off at the knees? Kneel, of course, and of course there are groans and jeers. These utterances make it clear that he believes his right to live supersedes anyone else's simply because he was born into a Mangerian family. And it's this class arrogance which is so dumbfounding. It's evident in xenophobic and racist clashes in current affairs today, clashes between students and schools. It has the potential to open up discussions on these and similar issues. And so this text is going to be very useful from that point of view. Ety may seem complacent, but her subversive nature constantly simmers beneath this facade. A person would be better off licking a drainer's shovel than sampling what I have prepared for the pot of porridge. Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. She's about to steal a book from Master's library, and so she poisons everyone in the house and goes about taking it, and admits that she's a thief and she can't help it. And she just makes it so hard to like her, really. But her affinity for books and reading is very important and brings us to a central theme and books as a motif. The power of narratives. We meet Reader. The book makes reference to our contemporary affinity for electronic books and Kindles, and I just love my Kindle app. Citing a past travesty that saw paperbacks dumped in landfills. Their scarcity make them valuable, and their aging condition after being dumped make them fragile. People who know things say that in the olden days people read books on machines. All the books in the world lived on machines so small you could hold them in your hand like a real live book. The books in Reader's library had all been dumped in landfills because no one wanted them anymore. Etty explains how she learned to read after reading for an old blind man who could not read his own books. The arrangement became important to both of them, as Etty read for him, and he then allowed her to read his books. She sent me to Reader. In return for the book, he taught me the alphabet. The next book I brought him, he traded a lesson in reading words. The words became sentences. We stumbled through nursery rhymes and fairy tales. Eventually, I could read. And books bring her and little Miss, or Larissa, together. Her sister accepts her because of the storytelling gift, emphasizing how powerful the spoken and written word really is. This is an important theme. It effectively conveys how stories and words can change the world and the way people feel to their very core. When the stories come to an end, she sighs. That is the most beautiful story I've ever heard. Even better than mother stories. Please, Etty, tell me some more. And her payment for that one story, the first thing that little Miss does for her is take her into Mistress's garden. And Etty loves trees and plants, and so this is a very special reward for Etty. The appearance versus reality theme is evident in the way characters feel for each other. There's a lot of false love. Etty starts to care deeply for Larissa, and we see this because she becomes quite protective of her. But on the other hand, Master, Larissa's father, doesn't really appear to love anyone. He's prepared to do anything to heal his daughter, but not being happy with her savage nature, he actually wants to change her. He's prepared to dabble in a kind of post-birth eugenics. He wants to remove a gene, so that future generations are more pliable, and he wants to take it out of his own daughter. Do you think I would allow anyone to hurt our daughter unless it was necessary? He says. Mistress has been bonded to him as a fate mate, but they don't really love each other. She smiles at him, but it's a different smile to the one she gives Maid Miriam, who she really cares about. It's not real. Etty is unloved by the very people who ought to love her. Handler Xavier doesn't know that he's her father, but he's really cruel to her. And likewise, her mother isn't kind. She says Larissa is so fond of her. I can't imagine why. She's such a dull little drudge. On the other hand, Handler Xavier is enigmatic because he is able to feel. He feels very protective of Kitty. Don't be like that, Etty. You don't know him like I do. He's the bravest person in the world. He tried to break my parents out of Savage City, and after they died, he looked after me. So, there's more to Handler Xavier than meets the eye, and perhaps we'll find out in subsequent novels whether he's a good or bad guy after all. We discover that he is a key member of the resistance, and he's just not interested in having Etty join that resistance, which is ironic because Etty is the one, even though he seems to think it is Kitty. Etty feels betrayed. She realizes that she thought she was part of a team, but the real game was being played somewhere else. The prophetic bird once again points to Etty as the one, but no one can see her, so they all think that it's Kitty. And this foreshadows Etty's future role in the liberation, but it's quite complicated by her parents' selfish concerns. We can't really see her caring enough to want to do anything about anyone else except herself. And in fact, that's how the book ends. She eventually abandons everybody and jumps in a boat and sails off, leaving everyone behind. The orphan warden knows that she's the one and tells Mary on her deathbed, and makes her promise to protect her. But you get the feeling that Mary isn't going to do that, despite her sister's deathbed confession about keeping Mistress's illegitimate child with Handler Xavier, and instead of murdering her, they took Mistress down the river, which is a euphemism for giving birth, and that's where they should have killed Mistress, killed Etty, sorry, but they didn't, or at least the orphan warden didn't. And so Etty realizes who her parents are and that she is one, sort of all at once, because she overhears the conversation. She's been called to the orphan warden's deathbed. And then the novel continues. It shows Etty and Nicholas releasing themselves and the rebels from the authority of the machine by deleting their numbers. And this is where you expect Etty and Nicholas to get together, maybe join the rebellion, but she doesn't. And the reason she doesn't is because she meets up with her mother at the end, and her mother reveals her true nature. She only cares about Larissa. She wants Etty to tell her where Nicholas is, because if she can produce Nicholas, then they will save her daughter Larissa. But Etty decides that she's not going to help anyone except herself. She leaves, and she leaves after she realizes who her mother is. The mask on one half of Mistress's face drops. Her face is hard, like her mother's. It declares war. The love I have for my daughter is strong as the hatred I will bear for anyone that harms her. She moves forward, her fist raised against me, her other daughter, the one she never loved. And we've got the beginning of the journey. The book ends on her journey, where the waves lap against the sea craft, and she awakes having cried in her sleep with her eyelashes wet. We learn that the reader has joined her to help her navigate. He's brought along books and braille, so only he can read them, so she can't leave him behind, although she probably would. Apparently the bird told him to meet her, told him that she would need him. The reader's smile was sly. His suitcase was packed with books I could not read. The reader has kept his end of the bargain, and I am learning to read blind. My eyes are shut, tight as my fingertip feels its way across the dots, and each word flows into me. In time the words will become sentences, then stories, my anchor on this ocean. News from the shore reaches her on her journey from Princess Fanny, demonstrating once again how important the birds are in this novel, as messengers and prophet guides. The bird tells me that Nicholas is still on the run. Little Miss is dying. The bird shrieks the words, diving at me from the sky, tearing my hair. It empties its bowels on the deck and bangs its beak against the mast until the entire telling is done. I do not know what story the bird will bring me, so I wait, but I dare not hope. And then the story ends with this epilogue. My name is Juliet 7. The date is 264 PC. In the time that comes after, I will return. I will find my beloved sister and my locust. The bird with scarred eyes cries of my retribution against those that harm them. My deeds were spoken of by the tellers before I existed, and they will be written in the blood of those who oppose me.